Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-FI. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Nancy Drew. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I thought this was kind of a fascinating case because obviously it starts off obviously it's kind of a little bit of a hazing situation on like a volleyball team, and this girl Jennifer stays in like 413, like this haunted room, but ends up disappearing, and obviously the girls get scared, and who do they turn to? None other than Nancy, because they're like, oh yeah, like they found, I think, it was actually Bess who set that up at Nancy Drew's or whatever. Like, I think she's the one that set that up in season 1, if I remember correctly. So it's like, oh, that's coming in handy in this regard. I also think it's fascinating because I feel like it happens, I feel like 90% of the time Nancy finds the cases, kind of. So it's interesting to see, like, oh, a case kind of inadvertently found her because of who she is. So the girls are like, hey, we need you to help find our friend. Which I love later on. It's like they leave Ace. She leaves Ace there to kind of look after them. And I love that later on he has to get Nick's help because he's like, yeah, they were scared about their friend, but then I told them about our experiences with ghosts, and then they were like feeling better, so please stay here, I need your help, bro, type of situation. But this ended up being a really interesting case because initially Nancy's thinking like, oh, you know, this is someone disappearing, so maybe this doesn't have anything to deal with ghosts. I think initially she's like, well, how can I say no? I immediately took that as she's taking responsibility because she thinks this might have something to do with the ghost that she released earlier. Like, I thought she was thinking maybe this had some kind of connection there, so I thought she probably felt more inclined to. But also, it's like, hey, I'm solving mysteries. Also, the current job she gets from her dad is about sorting files. It's not the glamorous, investigator work that she's used to, that she's usually doing. But to be fair, that was also her dad giving her a job while also sliding, hey, you ever thought about this college stuff? Columbia was kind of a big dream of yours. Yeah, what do you want to do about it? But obviously for her, it's like, considering who she is right now, it's like, what school's going to want her? Because she talks about, like, she kind of bummed out her senior year. Which I kind of get it. I did that with my junior year. Because if you didn't know that about me, I repeated my junior year. It's a whole thing. So I can get, granted, my reasons aren't the same reasons as Nancy's, which we'll get to that later. But still, this was an interesting case because obviously, you know, George and Bess are with her investigating for most of it. And I love that, like, anytime it's like, oh yeah, something about the room, it being cold, and Bess is like, yeah, it's ghosts. And then you have George being like, or it could be the fact is we're living in Maine and it's around cold, it's around winter. That could be the whole thing. Yeah, but they said in summer it stayed cool. Ghosts. Or it could be that we're living in Maine, air conditioning, being near the ocean, and it's like, she was like, if you say ghost one more time, because I love that that's Bess's answer. I mean, to be fair, when literally everything they've kind of gotten involved in over the course of the series has been about ghosts, it makes sense for your first jump to be anything crazy that's going down that's usually ghost related might be ghost related. But basically they end up finding out that the room has like a secret compartment because, like, basically the dresser moves because there's like a secret doorway, because the place was actually before it became like a hotel, it was like a family's house or something, a wealthy family's house. So basically, and that was kind of interesting, like a historical thing of like, oh yeah, they built like secret compartments so people couldn't see like maids and servants leaving, because it's like you want to seem prim and proper, like, oh, everything's so prim and proper, like looking at the help is kind of like, there's the help. They should be kind of not seen and not heard, but do their job type of thing. But upon investigating, they find like a dumbwaiter, and it looks like part of the rope broke. They go down to the basement and find like obviously it shows that Jennifer had fell down there, so it's like, okay, what's going on? Then they find like piles of blood, because then they're like, okay, this isn't a ghost thing, this might be a serial killer thing, because there's a whole bunch of blood and everything. And obviously Nancy and them get worried and they leave, but Nancy pieces it together. This hotel thing, like, yeah, there might have been people who accidentally died here, but they leaned into it and made it, because obviously it's like, yeah, and George figures, she's like, actually, it's pretty smart. Like, what do the people come to Maine for mainly? In particular, Horseshoe Bay, the lobster and the ghost. So, because even Nick's mom said it earlier this season, like, Stephen King was right. Maine is filled with nothing but ghosts. So it has that hauntingness to it that it's like this particular hotel leaned into it. So the person, the head owner, isn't a killer. Like, they set up this thing to kind of make it a bit of a horror show, rattling chains, audio screams to like make you get scared. So it's like, okay, so this had nothing to do with Jennifer's disappearance. Luckily they were able to get the recording of that night, and lo and behold, who did they run into? See, I was like, the moment the person walked in, I was like, oh, that's gonna be George, isn't it? And it ended up being George. So George had to admit, yeah, okay, so I've been kind of possessed by Odette the past couple weeks. It's like, why haven't you told any of us? Because for her, like, she didn't want to worry everyone. Because, well, on top of everything, and she explains this later on to Bess, it's like she's already got Nick worried about. Like, obviously, like, Nick's been freaking out ever since, because, you know, she literally died in his arms, and he's scared and petrified, and about the whole thing. And so obviously he's constantly checking on her in this episode. And I even love that later on, like, he kind of explains it to the ladies that were standing there, and they're like, oh, one, it's like, well, sometimes you just don't want people to think anything's wrong. You want them to just kind of give you your space. You don't want people to worry about you. So, maybe kind of give her a space. But then the other one was like, well, actually, I think it's kind of sweet, because it means that, hey, I want someone to know that, I want to know that someone's worried about me. And Nick was like, so what should I do? Should I send the follow-up text or no? And they just kind of shrugged. He's almost like, you brought this up and you're not going to give me a solution? It's like, yeah. Something he has to kind of ultimately figure out on his own. But yeah, about the Odette situation, obviously it's become more and more of a thing. We've only seen tidbits of it here and there, but obviously George kind of brings up which I brought up too. It's like, oh, you kind of got possessed by Tiffany, now your body sharing with the ghost. And it's like, well, she can't, it's different from the Tiffany thing, because that could have killed her. But now the question then is like, well, why is this a thing? Like, is it because in that moment, I'm wondering, it's like, could it be a thing of maybe the blanket drew in nearby spirits? So maybe the blanket, like the shroud or whatever, like, it drawed in nearby spirits. Her spirit was still relatively close enough to be drawn back into her body. Sadly, Odette was still around and kicking, so she got drawn back in too. Because I'm wondering, is that what Odette, like, is that why that happened to George, that it wasn't an accident, that maybe Odette did it on purpose? Because it's like, I don't want to just, well, I'm done being the Aglaika, I want to be able to live again, because I had my life taken from me. So she's in George's body because it was an available body. So maybe at the time, she jumped into it. Like, if they hadn't brought George back, maybe it would have been fine. Who knows if the shroud's the reason why they're both able to occupy the body without it screwing one of them over. It just could be a situation of maybe just the circumstances in general. Like I said, Tiffany possessing her was killing her, but this isn't. Or at the very least, as Bess says, maybe because she's an older ghost and Tiffany was a fairly recent ghost, maybe the rules apply differently. And maybe it's a situation, because usually, like, if a ghost's been around long enough, the more powerful it is, because they've kind of had more stuff kind of latched onto. She went through the process of being the Aglaika, so she's been around for centuries, so it's a little different. So it could just be because she's older, it's not taking as quickly of a toll on George's body as the Tiffany situation did. Like, maybe it's a slower process. That's her initial thought. Once again, I love that, like, Bess is kind of like the quote-unquote ghost expert on things. Because, like, when they find out, like, oh my God, like, when they finally are able to talk to Odette, which I love, like, I guess, like, she's offering George food. I guess it's some, like, French, maybe, like, we don't really get to see, but she's rattling a box, and George is like, I'm full. They have a picture of Odette. There's a particular book Bess is reading. She's like, I've been reading 3 chapters of this, and I still have no idea what this book is about. And there's kind of been a no-go, and they finally get Odette to come out by pretending to burn one of the last notes she had written to the woman that she was in love with all those years ago. And she's like, oh, Jennifer's with the hounds. And immediately Bess is like, I'm 99.9% sure that you killed Jennifer. I love that. Because even at one point, George was like, oh, we got to go to the cops. It's like, no, are you crazy? Literally the only person that's connected to Jennifer missing is you on camera. Tamura already would probably love to, and an excuse to kind of lock us up. He finds us at the center of something else like this. But Nancy and them ultimately find out that Jennifer didn't get killed, and that Hounds wasn't referring to Hounds of Hell. It was literally referring to the bus. And Nancy luckily finds her there. I was like, oh, why is she still there then? But and I like that. It turned out to be a supernatural. It turned out to start off as a supernatural case that turned out not to be supernatural. That had what I like. Once again, I will bring this up. Once again, my notion of Nancy Drew was going to be it has a little bit of a supernatural twist to it, not the big supernatural element it does to it. But it's like this case had a little bit of a supernatural twist to it only because of Odette. If it wasn't for Odette, but it was a situation of Jennifer kind of wanted to leave. She wanted to vanish. And at least this way, she would vanish without the notion of, oh, like I'm a college dropout. Because for her, it's like going to college, like working her butt off to get to a particularly good college. That's what she wanted for herself. But for her, it's like that's all she feels like identifies her. It's like outside of that, like, I don't know who I am. I'm not the person I thought I would be or who I wanted to be in college. So it's like, it's kind of, she's literally having an existential crisis about like, she just kind of wanted to disappear. And Nancy's like, I think I know why, then why haven't you taken the bus? Because I've looked at the schedule. There have been 3 buses since then, but you're still here. And she's like, you wouldn't understand. It's like, no, I do. It's like, obviously she failed out. Like, obviously, like she dealt with her mother's death. Her mom got sick. Her mom died. Then she found out all the crazy stuff about her family. Then my boyfriend got murdered. So it is a situation. And I love Jennifer being like, wow, all that happened to you? Why did you let me talk so long? Here I am having my little existential crisis and that all happened to you? Understandable why Nancy's struggling with what she's going through. Because for her, it's like all of who I am, kind of the mess that I am, kind of not knowing who I am. Like, how am I going to go to a college? Like, what college is going to accept me? But for Jennifer, it's like, despite all that going on in your life, you were still able to figure out a mystery like this. So it's like, you might not have figured it all out yourself, but you're still a badass, And I just thought that was kind of a neat thing for her to kind of say. So I thought that was a pretty dope resolution to it. Obviously, Jennifer shows up and tells the others, like, being a part of the volleyball team, she's like, she thought that's what she wanted, but it's kind of not her. It's not what she wants. But I think it's still pretty dope because I think they kind of hug it out regardless. And I think she still got some really good friends out of it, and it's, journey of self-discovery. And obviously Nancy's on her own discovery as she's like applying for college. And it's like, Nancy, and what do I put? It's like, I hope she can't necessarily, she can put Drew, but it's like, is that really who I am? I mean, am I, like she's in a crossroads trying to figure out who she is. Cause it's like, can't really put Hudson cause I'd have to acknowledge I'm a Hudson, and Drew doesn't feel right because am I really Nancy Drew anymore? Cause Nancy Drew is who she was before her mom died, before she learned the truth about her family situation. So it's like, but I'm not a Hudson either. Or am I, that's going to be a big part of this season of Nancy figuring out who she is, I think. So I thought that was kind of an interesting development on that front. Kind of another angle to this episode, obviously circling back to the whole situation with George. And obviously Bess is saying like, hey, you should talk to Nick about this. But for her, it's like, I can't. Nick's worried about so much already. I don't want to add this Odette thing on top of it. So it's like, all right, we'll keep it quiet. We'll wait until we find a way to get rid of Odette. But Odette's like, oh, if you want to get rid of me, you're going to have to kill your friend. And it's like, is that true? Or are you just saying that because you don't want to leave? And Odette just kind of does a smile like, you'll never know. I'll never tell. It's up to you to kind of decide whether I'm lying or telling the truth about that. So obviously, it is a situation of, I think Odette, it's like the life she could have led was robbed from her, so she's trying to take this opportunity. Because when she passed out, she went for a stroll. So that's all that was for her. So, I mean, granted, we don't know what else she's been doing, but I think it is going to be a complicated situation going forward. Because obviously, George isn't going to be able to keep this secret forever, which is interesting because her and Nick are in a very interesting situation where they're both keeping secrets from each other. Because obviously, Nick is also working with the whole situation with Ryan, and Ryan ends up, diving into taking what Tiffany gathered with some of the Hudson family stuff and kind of found out, my dad's actually done that wasn't the first time. The ship wasn't the first terrible thing my dad's ever did. That whole ship situation of sinking it, killing like 12 people. It's like, nah, that wasn't the only thing he did. He's done. That wasn't the first thing. Sure as hell hasn't been the last terrible thing that he's done to kind of get his way. So for Ryan, it's a thing of, he wasn't careful and he made a mistake, and because of like he was checking in on his dad's stuff, it was someone that was loyal to his dad. It's like eventually it's going to get to his dad, and he was looking into it, and obviously that's going to get Ryan found out, plus what they're up to. So Ryan rushes over to talk to Carson, which is like, okay, you need me a dog, give me a dog. He's like, I only got a 50. Carson's still holding 10. All right, and now you got lawyer privilege. And obviously the way his grandfather has set the whole situation up was basically it goes down the lineage line. Obviously, it went from his grandfather to his dad and his uncle. His uncle drank himself to death, so obviously it goes to his dad, which I guess Ryan's kind of implying like that's kind of why my dad is the way he is now, because like he didn't have to split that responsibility because it became all his. He became kind of like the sociopath that he is, the rich bastard willing to kind of do whatever. I think it's kind of what it made it seem like that's what he's implying. But the problem is, if he takes his father down, that basically because of the way the whole thing is set up, it will skip him, it will skip Ryan, and it would immediately go to his heir, that being Nancy. But Carson is saying that the way this thing is set up, because his grandfather's dead, there's no changing it. It's set in stone. But for Ryan, he's trying to do the right thing now, but doing the right thing might have just put Nancy potentially in his father's crosshairs, because his dad already hates Nancy, because Nancy's the one that he's in this situation where he's got to be like, oh, I'm on kind of a murder trial. Like, Nancy already put him in that position. Like, if he also finds out Nancy's the beneficiary, like the one who's going to benefit from this, who's the heir to all of this and gets the company, because Ryan's like, the moment Nancy gets an opportunity, she's going to burn that whole thing to the ground in a day. And obviously my father, he finds out, he will have extra reason to kill her, you know? So for him, it's like, you know, him and Carson are like, well, what do we do? Because I've already set things in motion that I don't know how to take it back. So Carson's like, only thing we can do is, you know, do whatever it takes to kind of protect Nancy. And that's, he could never, ever find out about Nancy. So Ryan puts himself in a position where he's the one kind of going to take the lead of the company and stuff like that, which Nick was kind of pissed about when he got the news. But Ryan, it's like, he tells a story of like, hey, this kid, Max was going to beat me up. So I went and told my dad, and my dad was saying like, oh, he's going to teach me how to throw a punch. He punched me thinking I was going to block, but then it was like, oh, you didn't? You disgust me, you're useless. And when he went to go to school, like, you know, thinking he's going to get his ass kicked, finds out Max got transferred to a different school. It might have been Mark. I might be confusing Max just with Resident Alien. But it's like, yeah, my dad paid his family to send him to a different school. It's like, that's how my dad always handles problems. And for him, it's like, you know, he has no sympathy for his dad. He knows exactly who and what his dad is. He grew up with him. And that's why Ryan's kind of messed up the way he is, because his dad's pretty messed up. Once again, whether that's who he always was, it was always there, or maybe that power position, like, corrupted him. I mean, like I said, that seed of darkness could have already been there. Getting all that power and stuff and doing whatever to keep it might have pushed him over the edge to be consumed by that darkness. Who knows? But when it's all said and done, though, he talks about the fact that he has to keep close to his dad, because he's like, I got to be nearby to deal the fatal blow. Obviously, using his father's words against him. But he's like, I can't do this alone, because I need to do this, because if I'm not careful, if I don't take him down, this could bring danger to Nancy. But I'm going to need your help, Nick. But if you do this, you're bringing danger into your life too. And Nick is like, you know, I made a promise to Tiffany. So that's what I'm saying. He's got his secret. She's got hers. So there's going to be a lot of that going forward, I think. And eventually it's probably going to come out about George's secret first, not unless both of their secrets kind of come out, which I think that's going to complicate things, especially because this relationship's still so new, and sadly things could kind of fall apart. We'll see how things kind of get handled from there. But another interesting side of things is Ace and Amanda. And at first I had to think, Amanda. I was like, right. The siblings that found, you know, the one who at the beginning was like, oh, calling for Nancy, and obviously her brother, like the whole Agleka situation when they were trying to get that, was it the mirror they needed? And they had it. So, like, I forgot. I was like, right. That's who she is. And so her and Ace are kind of hitting it off. It's like, oh, hey, oh, you need like, oh, Nancy said you had issues with the computer, and it's like, oh, I can type slower if you want. So I was like, oh, there's something there. I was like, oh, look at you, because I honestly would have expected a Nancy and Ace thing. Just that's where my mind had been since like partway through. At a certain point in season 1, made me kind of start thinking like that. Sadly, it doesn't seem like that's the case, but obviously him and Amanda, there's something there. Which even later on, she's like, "Oh, did you get what you needed from Nancy?" She's like, I'm pretty chill. Like, you didn't have to like do all that fake flirting. You know, it didn't have to be a ruse." Which she was like, "No, the flirting wasn't a ruse. I really do like you. It just probably felt, you know, it's like, oh, I'm sure he's just used to kind of having it, you know, working with Nancy, kind of going around people's back to do certain things. So it just, you know, if he probably had asked, she probably would have been, oh yeah, sure, okay, if you can do your thing." So. But the real stinger at the end is a guy showing up at the hotel looking for his wife, or either, I think, what did he say, wife? I think it's what he said he was looking for, and it was a picture of Bess. So I was like, okay, so we're finally going to circle back to some full-blown Marvin stuff, because the Marvin stuff has continued to be in the background, which, once again, I'm surprised Odette hasn't stirred up more trouble. Part of me wonders, is that why she's being a little smarmy with, or cheeky rather, with Odette? I mean, not Odette, because that's her character. I'm thinking of, I was about to say, I confused Odette with, I was about to say Odessa in my head. Once again, that's her character from Into the Badlands. Regardless, tangents and all that. With Bess. I'm surprised, like, no point of contention has already come up, her being a Marvin. Not less, you'd think, because it seems like she can be awake while George is awake, but the moment she takes control, George kind of, like, loses consciousness. So it's a one-way street when it comes to George, but Bess has it both ways. I mean, oh, God, Odette has it both ways. So I'm wondering why it works like that. But regardless, my whole point is, like, the reason why I was going on a tangent, because obviously, like, she has beef with the Marvins, so I would have thought that would have come up before now, but maybe that could be potentially where the story goes. A bigger point I was bringing up is, like, the Marvins have kind of been a background thing. We haven't really circled back to some, like, main Marvin family stuff, and I'm assuming that this is supposed to be, like, an arranged marriage thing, which, because that whole thing was, like, being set up last season. They, like, wanted her to sit down with some suitors and stuff like that. So I wonder if it has something to do with that, or maybe it has something to do with Bess's kind of grifter days, pretending to be who she is. So it might more so have something to do with that. It might not necessarily have to be a Marvin thing. It might just be a legit Bess thing. Maybe this has something to do before she came to Horseshoe Bay. Because, yeah, I didn't even think about that till now, because I was like, right, because she did put on the airs of pretending to be more, like, well-off than she really was, because even though she was, like, living out of her van at the time, before she admitted, like, who she really was, and she came to Horseshoe Bay looking for her family, so might have something to do specifically with Bess, not Bess Marvin, so it's going to be interesting to see ultimately where things end up taking us on that front, but, yeah, I'm really interested to see where all this ultimately ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.